10 standoffs where messages, ships, borders, and miscalculation tested diplomacy. This countdown moves from number 10 to number 1, with each archive leading into the next. We begin with Fashoda Incident, the crisis that nearly escalated. The Fashoda Incident, also known as the Fashoda Crisis, French, Crise de Fashoda, was the climax of imperialist territorial disputes between Britain and France in East Africa, occurring between the 10th of July and the 3rd of November 1898. A French expedition to Fashoda on the White Nile sought to gain control of the Upper Nile River basin and thereby exclude Britain from Sudan. The French party and a British Egyptian force, outnumbering the French by 10 to 1, met on friendly terms. However, in Europe, it became a war scare. Both empires stood on the verge of war with heated rhetoric on both sides. The tension surrounding Fashoda incident led to Agadir crisis, where diplomacy faced another path toward escalation. At number 9, Agadir crisis, the crisis that nearly escalated. The Agadir crisis, Agadir incident, or Second Moroccan crisis, was a brief crisis sparked by the deployment of a substantial force of French troops in the interior of Morocco in July 1911 and the deployment of the German gunboat SMS Panther to Agadir, a Moroccan Atlantic port. Germany did not object to France's expansion but demanded territorial compensation for itself. Berlin threatened warfare, sent a gunboat and stirred up German nationalists. Negotiations between Berlin and Paris resolved the crisis on the 4th of November 1911. France took over Morocco as a protectorate in exchange for territorial concessions to German Cameroon from the French Congo. The tension surrounding Agadir crisis led to Bosnian crisis, where diplomacy faced another path toward escalation. At number 8, Bosnian crisis, the crisis that nearly escalated. The Bosnian crisis, also known as the annexation crisis, German, Bosnische Annexionskrise, Turkish, Bosna-Krizi, Serbo-Croatian, Annexioner-Krize, or the First Balkan Crisis, erupted on the 5th of October 1908 when Austria-Hungary announced the annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, territories formerly within the sovereignty of the Ottoman Empire but under Austro-Hungarian administration since 1878. This unilateral action, timed to coincide with Bulgaria's declaration of independence from the Ottoman Empire on the 5th of October, sparked protestations from all the great powers and Austria-Hungary's Balkan neighbors, Serbia and Montenegro. In April 1909, the Treaty of Berlin was amended to reflect the fait accompli and bring the crisis to an end. The tension surrounding Bosnian crisis led to July crisis, where diplomacy faced another path toward escalation. At number 7, July crisis, the crisis that nearly escalated. The July crisis was a series of interrelated diplomatic and military escalations among the major powers of Europe in mid-1914, which led to the outbreak of World War I. It began on the 28th of June 1914 when the Bosnian Serb nationalist Gavrilo Princip assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir presumptive to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife Sophie, Duchess of Hohenberg. A complex web of alliances, coupled with the miscalculations of numerous political and military leaders, who either regarded war as in their best interests or felt that a general war would not occur, resulted in an outbreak of hostilities amongst most of the major European states by early August 1914. The tension surrounding July crisis led to Trent Affair, where diplomacy faced another path toward escalation. At number 6, Trent Affair, the crisis that nearly escalated. The Trent Affair was a diplomatic incident in 1861 during the American Civil War that threatened a war between the United States and the United Kingdom. Navy captured 2 Confederate envoys from a British Royal Mail steamer. The British government protested vigorously. American public and elite opinion strongly supported the seizure, but it worsened the economy and was ruining relations with the world's strongest economy and strongest navy. President Abraham Lincoln ended the crisis by releasing the envoys. On November 8, 1861, USS San Jacinto, commanded by Union Captain Charles Wilkes, intercepted the British mail packet RMS Trent and removed, as contraband of war, 2 Confederate envoys, James Murray Mason from Virginia and John Slidell from Louisiana. The tension surrounding Trent Affair led to XYZ Affair, where diplomacy faced another path toward escalation. At number 5, XYZ Affair, the crisis that nearly escalated. The XYZ Affair was a political and diplomatic episode in 1797 and 1798, early in the presidency of John Adams, involving a confrontation between the United States and Republican France which led to the Quasi-War. The name derives from the substitution of the letters X, Y, and Z for the names of French diplomats Jean-Conrad Hottinger, X, Pierre Bellamy, Y, and Lucien Hautval, Z, in documents released by the Adams administration. An American diplomatic commission was sent to France in July 1797 to negotiate a solution to problems that were threatening to break out into war. The diplomats, Charles Cotesworth Pinckney, John Marshall, and Elbridge Gerry, were approached through informal channels by agents of the French Foreign Minister, Charles Maurice de Talleyrand-Périgord. The tension surrounding XYZ affair led to Dogger Bank incident, where diplomacy faced another path toward escalation. At number 4, Dogger Bank incident, the crisis that nearly escalated. The Dogger Bank incident, also known as the North Sea incident, the Russian outrage or the incident of Hull, occurred on the night of 22 October 1904, during the Russo-Japanese War, when the Baltic Fleet of the Imperial Russian Navy mistook civilian British fishing trawlers from Kingston upon Hull in the Dogger Bank area of the North Sea for Imperial Japanese Navy torpedo boats and fired on them, also firing on each other in the chaos of the melee. 2 British fishermen died, 6 more were injured, 1 fishing vessel was sunk, and 5 more boats were damaged. On the Russian side, 1 sailor and a Russian Orthodox priest aboard the cruiser Aurora were killed by friendly fire. The incident almost led to war between the United Kingdom and the Russian Empire. The tension surrounding Dogger Bank incident led to Corfu incident, where diplomacy faced another path toward escalation. At number 3, Corfu incident, the crisis that nearly escalated. The Corfu incident was a 1923 diplomatic and military crisis between Greece and Italy. It was triggered when Enrico Tellini, an Italian general heading a commission to resolve a border dispute between Albania and Greece, was murdered in Greek territory along with 2 other officers of his staff. In response, Benito Mussolini issued an ultimatum to Greece and, when it was not accepted in whole, dispatched forces to bombard and occupy Corfu. Mussolini defied the League of Nations and stated Italy would leave if it arbitrated in the crisis, and the Conference of Ambassadors instead eventually tendered an agreement favoring Italy. The tension surrounding Corfu incident led to Chanak crisis, where diplomacy faced another path toward escalation. At number 2, Chanak crisis, the crisis that nearly escalated. The Chanak crisis, Turkish, Çanakkale Krizi, also called the Chanak Affair and the Chanak Incident, was a war scare in September 1922 between the United Kingdom and the government of the Grand National Assembly in Turkey. Chanak refers to Çanakkale, a city on the Anatolian side of the Dardanelles Strait. The crisis was caused by Turkish efforts to push the Greek armies out of Turkey and restore Turkish rule in the Allied-occupied territories, primarily in Constantinople, now Istanbul, and eastern Thrace. Turkish troops marched against British and French positions in the Dardanelles neutral zone. For a time, war between Britain and Turkey seemed possible, but Canada refused to agree, as did France and Italy. The tension surrounding Chanak crisis led to Nootka crisis, where diplomacy faced another path toward escalation. At number 1, Nootka crisis, the crisis that nearly escalated. The Nootka crisis, also known as the Spanish armament, was an international incident and political dispute between Spain and Great Britain triggered by a series of events revolving around sovereignty claims and rights of navigation and trade. It took place during the summer of 1789 at the Spanish outpost of Santa Cruz de Nootka on Vancouver Island. The commander of the outpost, Esteban José Martínez Fernández y Martínez de la Sierra, seized several British merchantmen intending on engaging in the maritime fur trade and building a permanent outpost at Nootka Sound. A public outcry in Britain led to the mobilization of the Royal Navy and the possibility of war. That was top 10 diplomatic crises that nearly escalated. Every story in this countdown began as a shorter archive, but the connections only appear when the files are placed together. Subscribe for the next collection.